I paid for everything, but they made me sit alone, so I closed the account the next morning. They set the table without a place for me. It was the long dining table I had paid for. In the house I co-signed under the chandelier I chose and had installed, they walked past me with dishes, napkins, glasses, and not one of them looked up. Not once. The kids were laughing, my daughter-in-law was pouring wine, and my son was too busy fixing the Bluetooth speaker to notice I was still standing by the kitchen doorway. I thought maybe they'd realized and were playing some kind of joke. But then my grandson pointed to the lone chair by the breakfast bar, away from the table, and said, "That's Grandma's spot, right?" And no one corrected him. That's when I knew. I'm Margaret Halstead. I'm 71, and that was the moment. I knew they didn't see me anymore. Subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Thanks, I used to be their center. I was the one who woke early to make pancakes on birthdays. Who knew how to rub lavender oil into tiny temples when nightmares hit? When my son lost his job the second time, I was the one who called my lawyer and said, "Just make it happen. They need the house by June." I covered the down payment, quietly. When my daughter-in-law had her first child, I moved in for 3 months, sleeping on an air mattress in the laundry room. Because I didn't want to take up space, I thought love was best shown in silence, in filling up their gaps without ever asking to be seen. I thought it would be obvious what I meant to them. We used to have Sunday dinners. I'd roasted chickens, make my mother's corn pudding. When they had enough money to host instead, I smiled and said how nice it was to just show up. I brought wine, I brought dessert, I brought flowers. I didn't realize I was bringing myself as a guest instead of being part of the family. The shift was so quiet, like erosion. I didn't notice I was becoming scenery. Last month I saw the credit card bill. It was a joint card I'd opened for emergencies, but over time they used it for everything. Flights to Aspen, a patio renovation, a Peloton subscription. That month, there was a charge for a catering company. I hadn't been invited to any event. Then I found the photos, a birthday party for my granddaughter, held in the house I helped them buy. I wasn't there, not in a single frame. But I recognized the cake. It was the same bakery I always used. I sat in my small living room for hours. That night, holding the remote but never turning on the television, I remembered how many dresses I'd hemmed, how many fevers I'd cooled, how many nights I'd sat in the emergency room with a knitting bag on my lap while they panicked. In paste, I was always a steady one, and somehow that made me invisible. I didn't call. I didn't cry. I simply printed out every statement, highlighted every charge, and slid the folder into my purse. I made an appointment with the bank manager. She looked at me like I was someone to be handled gently, the way people do with old women who speak softly. But I knew what I was doing. I closed the account, froze the joint card, transferred the equity into a trust with only my name on it. She asked me if I wanted to notify the other parties. I said no. Let them find out on their own. Then I booked a room in a motel 2 towns over. The kind with stiff white sheets and a laminated guide to nearby diners. I didn't bring much. Just a duffel bag, my documents, and a photo album I hadn't opened in 5 years. They called. Of course, missed calls. Text. Why is a card declined? Did you do something, Mom? What's going on? Not once did they ask if I was okay. Not once did they say, "Come home. We miss you." I didn't answer. I watched their panic unfold in tiny blue bubbles. They tried to log into the joint account, tried to reset the passwords. I changed the email, the phone number. They were locked out of everything. I imagined their faces, the disbelief. The moment they realized I was no longer a background character. In the quiet of the motel, I started to sleep again. I walked to the diner for breakfast. The waitress learned my name. She called me Miss Margaret and remembered I liked my coffee with 1 sugar. One afternoon, a little girl in the booth next to mine dropped her crayon box. I bent to help her pick it up. Her father smiled at me and said, "You're fast for someone with gray hair." It wasn't much, but it made me feel seen. I started writing again, little poems, grocery list kinds of things, but they were mine. I wrote them on napkins, receipts, the margins of the motel notepad. One evening, a knock at my door. It was my son. He looked older than I remembered, not tired, just hollow. He said they were worried that they missed me, that the kids kept asking when Grandma was coming back. He held out a gift bag like it could fix something. I told him I was safe, that was all. I didn't invite him in, he said. "We didn't mean to push you away." I looked at him, and I said, "That's the thing. You didn't mean anything at all." He stood there, stunned, then he nodded. He left the bag on the floor and walked away. I never opened it. I left it at the front desk the next morning and asked the clerk to donate it to someone who needed it. Now, I live in a small rental by the sea. The neighbors know my name. The woman next door brings over tomatoes from her garden. Sometimes I sit on the porch and let the sun warm my knees. I still have the photo album, but I don't open it anymore. The last page is blank. Maybe I'll fill it with new faces, maybe I won't. But either way, I'm not waiting for anyone to make room for me again this time. I decide who gets to call me anything else. I wasn't always this quiet. Once my laugh filled rooms. I was the one people called first, to share good news, to cry, to ask what temperature the oven should be on. I was a safe place. That's what they used to say. Mom makes everything feel calm. My husband, Richard, died when I was 48. Sudden heart attack. He was mowing the lawn. One moment he was waving to the neighbor, the next I was holding his hand in the ambulance, whispering please over and over, like I could anchor him here with my voice. He didn't make it. After that, it was just me and Matthew, my son. He was 19, tall, quiet, stubborn like his father. He tried not to cry at the funeral, but when we were alone, he collapsed against me like he was 5 again. I held him, the way I had on nights when he was feverish and small, when I sang songs only he knew. I remember thinking, we'll make it through this, we'll take care of each other. I sold the house, moved into a smaller place closer to his college. I packed Richard's things into labeled boxes and let Matthew choose what to keep. I never forced him to talk, just stayed near. He got his degree in accounting, got a good job, married a girl named Eliza who wore pearl earrings, and always smiled too much. She wasn't cruel, just guarded, the kind of woman who believed every mother-in-law was a threat. I tried to keep my voice soft. I praised her cooking, even when it was too salty. I offered to help without hovering. When they had their first child, Lily, they were overwhelmed. I moved in for a while to help. Eliza had a rough recovery, and I knew better than to take credit for anything. I made freezer meals, washed bottles, held the baby at 2 a.m. so they could sleep. I'd tiptoe in and out like a ghost. It felt natural to give, to be useful. After I moved back to my condo, the visits slowed down. I told myself it was normal. Young families get busy. I'd send little care packages, coloring books, cookies, notes written in my careful handwriting. For a while they'd send photos back, Lily in her Halloween costume, James learning to walk. But the replies got shorter, less frequent. One Christmas, they told me they'd be doing their own thing. It's just easier this year. Mom, I understood. Or at least, I said I did. So I brought a casserole to the neighbor's potluck and told them my family lived far away. When Matthew got laid off during the pandemic, I didn't hesitate. I paid their mortgage for 6 months, quietly, through the online portal. I didn't even tell them right away, just forwarded the confirmation. He called me and said, "You didn't have to do that." I said, "I know, but I wanted to." What I didn't say was that I cashed out one of my retirement accounts. After that, things seemed better. They invited me to more dinners. Matthew would bring me a cup of tea without me asking. Eliza seemed lighter. I thought, maybe this is a turn. Maybe now I'm seen again. So when they asked to add my name to their joint credit card for emergencies, I agreed. It started with groceries, then a car repair, a school fundraiser, a vacation to Disneyland. They said they'd pay it back when they could. I didn't ask questions. I was just happy to be included. Sometimes they'd let me join dinner by Zoom, especially during the lockdowns. The kids would show me their drawings. Eliza would say things like, "You're such a blessing." Margaret. It made my heart swell. I didn't know it then, but I was being phased out with politeness, with soft words and occasional photos. The last real conversation I remember with Matthew, the kind where he asked about me, my day, my books, my knitting, was 2 years ago. After that, I became the helper again, the safe place, the background. They built their life with the pieces I handed them, and I kept handing them more. Now, looking back, I see the small silences. How Eliza never called me mom. How they never asked if I needed anything. How the gifts I gave were never displayed. It was always me adapting, folding myself smaller to fit their world. Even my birthdays became quiet. Last year, they sent a group text that said happy birthday. Hope it's a good one. No card, no call. I baked my own cake. I sat by the window and watched the neighbors' kids ride their bikes. And I tried to believe I was loved. I really did. But that birthday, it stayed in my chest like a stone. Now, in this motel room, I think about that day a lot. How I blew out the candle and made no wish, because even then, I think I knew I was becoming invisible. And I let it happen because I thought that was what love meant. To give without asking for anything back. I didn't know that love, real love, lets you take up space, not just be useful, not just be quiet, but be seen. That realization didn't come all at once. It came like dusk, slow, creeping, inevitable. And when the dark finally settled, I was already packed, ready to leave the table they set without me. The week after they left me at the breakfast bar, I tried to tell myself it wasn't deliberate. That maybe they'd just run out of chairs. That maybe someone would text the next morning, say something light and quick, "Sorry, Mom. We were distracted. Come over tonight and we'll do it again. Properly this time." No one did. I checked my phone a dozen times that night. I left the ringer on like a fool. I woke at 3 a.m. just to glance at the screen. Nothing. Not even a missed call. So I got up, made tea, and sat at the kitchen counter. Same place I'd been made to sit while they ate around the big table I'd helped pay for. I opened my laptop. I don't even remember what I thought I was looking for. Maybe some distraction. Maybe answers. Instead, I opened the credit card statement. The online portal still had my name listed first. I'd set it up, chosen the password, linked it to my old email, the one I never gave to Eliza. That night, I stared at a list of charges. That didn't make sense. A designer dress boutique, over $600. Then a weekend stay at a beach resort 2 hours away. And then this one caught me. A payment to a catering service I remembered from Eliza's sister's wedding. I clicked. The details. The billing description said event for 18, private residence. The date matched Lily's birthday. I froze. I opened Facebook, scrolled through Eliza's profile. It was public, at least the photos were . And there they were . All of them Lily. Beaming in a little yellow dress, James holding a balloon shaped like a tiger, Matthew standing behind a cake topped with glittering sparklers, Eliza in a sundress, holding a champagne glass. I stared for a long time. I enlarged the pictures, looked at the decorations, the chairs, the background. It was their house. The one I helped them save when they were months behind on the mortgage. The same kitchen, where I had once scrubbed applesauce from the floor while Eliza cried in the bathroom after her second was born. And I wasn't there. Not even a mention. Not even a cupcake left behind. They had thrown a party with my money. In the house I helped preserve and cut me out of the picture completely. The ache in my chest wasn't new, it had been there for years. But that night, it sharpened. Like a needle being pushed through a buttonhole too tight. I didn't cry. I just sat there. Quiet. I thought about every time Eliza said, "Oh, it's just easier to keep things small." Every time Matthew said, "You know how tired we are. Mom, maybe next week." And still, I kept showing up with groceries, with new socks for the kids, with a full tank of gas when their car was sputtering. I believed them, that there wasn't space, that I was asking for too much just by wanting to sit with them. But that night, staring at the photos, I understood. It wasn't about space, they just didn't want me in the picture. I clicked through more charges. A new iPad, dinner at a high-end steakhouse. A massage package, all paid through the card that's still pulled from my account. I had never said no, and they had taken that as permission. Not once had they asked, "Is this okay, Mom?" They just assumed. I scrolled further back, found charges from months ago I'd never noticed. Thousands. All while I'd been clipping coupons for my groceries, skipping my arthritis appointments because the copay had gone up. I laughed. A small sound, dry and sharp. It startled me. I closed the laptop. Got up and opened the drawer where I kept my documents. Birth certificate, marriage license, copy of the deed to my condo, the original paperwork for the credit account. It still had only one primary owner. Me. That's single quotes S when the decision started forming. Not fully. Not yet. But like a storm you can smell before you see. It was quiet, the way most shifts are. Not a crash. Just a door slowly closing. I thought about confronting them, driving over, slamming the statement down on their kitchen counter. But what would that do? They'd say I misunderstood, that I was being desensitive, that I'd been invited but probably didn't see the message. They would spin it. They always could. And I would shrink again. I'd cry in my car and they'd move on. I didn't want an apology. I wanted clarity. I wanted to stop handing over pieces of myself, hoping someone would finally treat me as whole. That night I laid out every piece of paper in neat rows. Then I took out a yellow legal pad and wrote down everything that was still mine. Not just the legal stuff. The memories. The songs I sang to Matthew when he had the flu, the quilt I stitched for Lily's crib, the recipe for blackberry jam my grandmother taught me. I wrote them down, one by one, and I wrote this too. They don't get to decide who I am. They don't get to use my love as currency. That was the first moment I felt steady again, not happy, not healed. Just steady. Like a woman standing in a room full of wreckage, holding the only candle left and realizing it was still lit. The morning after I found the photos, I sat on the edge of my bed and watched the light crawl across the floorboards. Pale, thin light, the kind that doesn't warm you, just shows you what you hadn't wanted to see the night before. My tea had gone cold on the nightstand. I didn't touch it. I didn't move for a long time. I used to think that staying silent made me strong, that if I didn't complain, didn't cry, didn't ask for thanks, I was proving something, dignity, maybe grace. But that morning, I felt the weight of every word I hadn't said. It was like trying to breathe under Wet laundry. I got up, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't bear the stillness anymore. I folded laundry I didn't remember washing. Wiped down counters that were already clean. Opened cabinets just to close them again, and all the while, the question moved through my body like a slow current: if I don't matter to them, then what am I doing here? It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't even sadness, not anymore. It was clarity, cold like glass. I went back to the folder, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the manila flap with the bills and account summaries and notarized forms for years. I kept it neat, filed alphabetically, every slip of paper pressed and whole. It made me feel useful, in control. That morning, it made me feel foolish. I protected them so carefully. Written checks when their fridge broke. Called the insurance company when their toddler chipped a tooth. I told myself I was building a legacy. But I wasn't. I was just making myself easier to erase. There was a woman I used to know back when Matthew was small. Her name was Lenore. She worked at the library. She had white hair and hands that smelled like old paper. One day, she told me that the only people who get to rewrite your story are the ones you let hold the pen. I didn't understand her then, but I do now. I had handed them the pen, year after year, signing things, paying things, nodding when they dismissed me, smiling when they forgot. So that morning, I took it back. I made a list. Not of what they'd taken, that would be endless, but of what I still had. My name, my home, my documents, my breath. That list was shorter than I wanted it to be, but it was mine. I started small. Called the bank, asked to verify all joint accounts. I kept my voice calm, steady. I was polite, and they were polite in return. Then I called my attorney, the one who helped me draw up my will after Richard died. I hadn't spoken to her in years. She was kind. She remembered how much I hated the word estate. I told her I wanted to revise everything. She said she'd clear her calendar. I started writing things down. Not just legal steps, but thoughts, truths. They don't know me. They only know what I've given them. That's not the same. I wrote that 1-3 times. The mail came around too. There was a card from Lily, scribbled crayon drawings inside. Her name is spelled, just like always. I held it for a long time. I knew she didn't know. She was too little to understand what had been done. I put the card on the fridge. It was the only thing that stayed. That evening, I opened a new email account. Chose a password no one could guess. I changed my bank logins. Closed out the old shared cloud drive. I deleted the family calendar. Eliza used to call it her lifeline. Now it was blank. I wrote a letter to myself. Not a goodbye. Not a diary entry, just a promise. It said, "You're not wrong for wanting to be seen. You're not selfish for saying enough. You're allowed to leave." I folded it and placed it under my pillow. I didn't sleep that night, but I did rest. There's a difference. Sleep escapes you. Rest holds you in place, even when you're grieving the next day. I started sorting through the boxes in the hall closet. Things I hadn't touched in years. Baby clothes, Richard's college books, Matthew's first drawing. I kept the drawing. The rest went into donation bins. It didn't feel like erasing. It felt like clearing space. By the weekend, I booked the motel. Quiet place, 2 towns over, clean, forgettable. That's what I wanted, not a fresh start, just a pause button. A place to think without their noise. I packed slowly. Took only what mattered. My documents. My notebook. A few clothes and the yellow legal pad on the last page. I wrote in bold, "I am no longer waiting to be invited." The line rang in my chest like a bell. It didn't sound like anger. It sounded like freedom. They would notice my absence eventually. They'd ask questions, call, maybe, try to patch things up with lightness and too late apologies. But by then, I'd already be gone, not just from the house. From the role I'd been trapped in for too long, not the helper, not the extra chair, not the afterthought. Just Margaret. No explanation required. I left on a Monday. That seemed like the kind of day you could disappear without causing a stir. Everyone's too busy with work, traffic, school drop-offs. They don't notice when a woman like me vanishes. I packed the car just before sunrise. The street was still dark and damp, quiet except for the newspaper hitting the neighbor's porch. I stood for a moment in my driveway, keys in hand, listening to the silence. I thought maybe I'd feel fear or guilt, but all I felt was stillness. There's a particular freedom in walking away before anyone knows they should try to stop you. I didn't leave a note, didn't send a message. I just took what was mine. My duffel bag, my documents, my legal pad with the last few pages filled in, my wedding ring too, not to wear, but to remember who I had once been, the girl who said I do in a church with stained glass and shaking hands. She had dreams. I wanted to carry a piece of her with me. I drove without the radio on. I didn't need the noise. Just the road stretching out in front of me. The motel was easy to miss. A single-story building with faded green doors and a cracked ice machine. Humming near the office, the man at the front desk didn't ask questions, just handed me a key with a plastic tag that breakfast was between 6 and 8, and pointed to room 14. Inside, the air smelled like old pine cleaner and something sweet, maybe cinnamon, maybe dust. The bedspread was thin, the lamp flickered, and the mirror over the sink had a crack in the corner. It was perfect. I sat on the edge of the bed and didn't move for a long while. Not out of sadness, not even exhaustion, just relief. There was no one needing anything. No voice calling down the hall, no child crying. No phone buzzing with requests for money or help or advice, just quiet. I pulled out the folder of papers and began organizing. I'd already frozen the joint card and redirected all account alerts to my new email. But now came the next part. I called the bank and removed my name from every automatic draft tied to their utilities, subscriptions, insurance. They'll notice eventually, I thought. They'll open their accounts and see the charges bouncing back. Maybe they'll call the number listed. Maybe they'll say, "My mother handles this," and someone will answer, "Not anymore." I moved on to the trust paperwork. I'd already begun the process of shifting the condo into my name alone. No survivorship, no shared access, no in case something happens to you. We'd like to be prepared. Funny how people talk about love when they're really talking about control. They hadn't wanted me in their lives, not truly, but they'd wanted access to the things I built. My lawyer had used the phrase protective restructuring. I liked that. It didn't sound like revenge. It sounded like dignity. I signed the final papers, dated each line, placed them in a manila envelope. Done. The rest of the afternoon, I wrote pages and pages of memories. Not letters, not diaries, just moments I wanted to preserve for myself. Matthew learning to whistle on the back porch. Richard rubbing my feet after long shifts. The first time Lily said grandma and ran into my arms like she meant it. I didn't write the endings to those stories, I just let them sit unfinished. That was enough. By evening, I felt lighter, not happy, not yet, but unburdened. I heated a microwave dinner from the vending machine downstairs and sat by the window. Outside, a delivery truck pulled into the lot. The driver got out, stretched his arms over his head, and smiled up at the moon. I watched him, thinking how free he looked, then I laughed. Soft and sudden, I was free, too, for the first time in years. No one knew where I was. No one could demand anything from me. I was untraceable, unreachable. Not missing. Just gone. The next morning, I walked down the street to the small diner I'd seen on the way in. A bell chimed when I opened the door. A woman behind the counter looked up and said, "Sit wherever you like." I sat by the window. She brought me coffee without asking. I stayed there a long time, ate eggs slowly, watched the world move on without me. It was peaceful, being invisible on purpose. I started coming back every morning. The waitress learned my name. Her name was Carmen. She asked where I was from. I said, "Not far." She didn't ask more. I liked that about her. Sometimes she'd bring me an extra slice of toast. Say she made too much. Sometimes we sat in silence. Those were the best days. Back at the motel, I made a small routine. I read, wrote, walked. I deleted old voicemails, the ones that started with "Mom, we need." The ones that ended with "Call me back," I didn't. Each small action felt like sewing up a hole in the lining of a coat, invisible to everyone else, but warmer, stronger. Mine. I changed my phone number, ordered new checks, created a new will. Every decision was a thread tying me back to myself. I wasn't planning on disappearing forever, but I was done making space in my life for people who had pushed me to the side of theirs. I had loved them with everything I had. Now I was loving myself. The same way, not with flowers or declarations, but with protection. Boundaries. Silence. Power that looked like stillness. By Friday, I cleaned out the last of my shared accounts. Not a trace left of their names. No more ghost fingerprints on my documents. Just mine. That night, I took the envelope of papers, walked to the little metal trash can outside the motel, and lit a match. I didn't burn everything. Just the printouts from the old account. The ones that showed how much they took, the lies in itemized form. I watched the paper curl and blacken. Then I walked back to my room, shut the door. And slept, really slept. Like a woman who finally knew she belonged to no one but herself. They must have noticed around noon on the second Monday. That's when the texts started piling in. I was sitting at the diner, stirring my tea long after it had gone lukewarm, when the first message buzzed through. From Matthew. For words, "Car's not working, you okay?" I stared at the screen. I didn't move. Carmen came by with the coffee pot, raised her brows at me. I shook my head. She nodded and walked on. I turned the phone face down, let it rest on the tabletop while the world around me stayed in motion. Silverware clinked, a baby cried. Someone's car alarm blipped in the distance, the sound of life, untouched by the tremble I knew had just begun. 10 minutes later, another. Eliza this time. What's going on? Groceries just bounced. Then another. Then another. Mom, can you call us? This is really serious. Did something happen? My hand stayed still. I didn't respond, not out of malice, not out of power, just peace. I had no interest in her panic. I sipped my tea, pressed the cup gently to my lips, and remembered the way Eliza once said, we just need you to trust us. With the money stuff, you get overwhelmed. I hadn't answered her back then. I just nodded like always, nodded and signed and kept quiet. Now they were overwhelmed. The irony didn't make me smile. It just sat beside me like a silent friend. Watching the panic unfold in blue lit text. By the time I got back to the motel, there were voicemails. I didn't play them all. Just the first. It was Matthew, his voice tight, irritated. Mom, you need to call me. The internet's down, the phone bill didn't go through, and the electric company says the autopay stopped last week. I don't know what you did, but this is not okay. Not okay. The way he said it, like I'd knocked over a vase in his clean living room. He didn't ask if I was alright. Didn't say they miss me. Just listed the things no longer working, and somehow in his voice, I was the one being unreasonable. I turned off the phone, let it sleep for a day or two. I went for walks, sat in the sun outside the motel with my notebook, watched the ants crawl across the cracked pavement. Life kept moving, without me holding anyone together. It was a strange comfort. On Wednesday, the motel clerk knocked gently on my door, said a woman came by asking for me, asked if I wanted him to pass along a message. I said no. Thank you, he nodded. His eyes were kind, not curious, just respectful. That afternoon, I turned my phone on again. 40-3 messages. Most of them short, frantic. You have to talk to us. This is getting insane. The kids are asking where you are. Why are you doing this? That one made me pause. Why are you doing this? As if I had turned cruel overnight. As if they hadn't been slicing me out of their lives piece by piece for years. I didn't reply, but I did type something. I typed, I'm not doing anything to you, I'm just finally doing something for me. I deleted it before sending. They wouldn't understand. Or maybe they would. Maybe that was the scariest part. By the weekend, I got the first apology. Half-hearted. Eliza says we made you feel left out. It wasn't intentional, we've just been busy. Come home and we can talk. Home. The word scraped because I had been home. In their home. Sitting at their table, invisible. Handing them the keys, the cards, the passwords, paying for everything and eating alone. Now I lived in a small room with flickering lights, and no one depending on me. And I'd never felt steadier. They tried one more angle. Guilt. Lily drew you a picture. She cried when you didn't come last Sunday. Please don't do this to them. To them. Never mind what they'd done to me. I stared at that one for a long time. Then I shut the phone again. Went to the diner. Carmen poured my coffee and asked how I was sleeping. Better. I said. Much better. She told me about her grandkids. How the youngest had learned to whistle through her teeth. We laughed. It was easy. It was real. The next day, I went to the library, got myself a card. Checked out 2 books, one mystery, one about birds. The woman at the counter said, I haven't seen you before, just moved here, something like that. I said, and it felt good. Not like hiding, just beginning again. The call slowed. The text turned to silence. And in that silence, I began to breathe deeper. They were learning to live without my support, and I was learning to live without their approval. I didn't know which of us would adjust faster, but I hoped for their sake that it would be them because I had no intention of going back. I wasn't angry, I wasn't cruel. I just wasn't theirs anymore. They had mistaken my loyalty for permanence. And now they knew. Even the quietest woman can leave without slamming the door. The first morning I woke without a text or a call waiting felt strange. I blinked against the pale light slipping through the motel curtains, and reached for my phone out of habit. Nothing, no missed messages, no frantic calls, just silence. I didn't know whether to feel relief or loneliness, but mostly I felt free. I slipped on the cardigan I brought from home, the one Richard had bought from years ago, soft and worn, and stepped outside. The air smelled like salt and earth, a scent I hadn't breathed in a long time. The sea wasn't far. I could hear it, a low, steady murmur beyond the town's sleepy streets. I walked slowly toward the shore, each step a quiet rebellion against the years of being small. Unseen, invisible in my own family story, the beach was empty except for a few gulls circling overhead and an old man sitting on a bench, feeding crumbs to a scruffy brown dog. He smiled when I passed, a gentle nod of acknowledgement, like he knew what it was to be adrift. I sat on a weathered driftwood log nearby and watched the waves curl and break, retreat and return, relentless. And sure, in that moment, I realized something. Peace isn't the absence of pain or betrayal. It's the quiet that follows when you stop fighting to be seen by those who refuse to look. I started going to the beach every morning. Sometimes the old man was there, sometimes not. I never asked his name, it didn't matter. I like that we share the same space without needing words. At the diner, Carmen introduced me to Mrs. Delgado, the woman who ran the little bookshop down the street. Mrs. Delgado had a quick smile and stories that made me laugh. She talked about her own family, the ones who had left and the ones she had found along the way. Found family. The phrase settled in my chest like a warm stone. I hadn't realized how much I craved belonging, not because of blood or duty, but because of kindness and respect. Mrs. Delgado invited me to a weekly knitting circle at the library. I hesitated at first, unsure if I was ready to be part of a group again, but when I showed up, they welcomed me like I was a missing stitch. Finally found, there was laughter and quiet conversation, the sound of needles clicking rhythmically, the warmth of wool passing from hand to hand. I brought my old knitting bag, the one I'd stuffed with projects years ago when life was too busy to stop. Sitting there, surrounded by women with stories etched in their faces, I felt a small piece of myself come back, not the mother who had been erased, but the woman who still held her own name. I found a small apartment a few blocks from the motel, a modest place with creaky floors and a porch that caught the afternoon sun. I painted the walls a soft cream and hung a faded watercolor of a lighthouse my mother had sent me decades ago. I unpacked only what I needed: my books, a few photographs, the quilt I'd made for Lily when she was born, folded neatly in a basket. That quilt had always been a symbol of love, but now it felt like something more, a shield, a promise to myself that I would protect the parts of me still whole. One afternoon, a little girl from next door came by, shy and curious, holding a sprig of wildflowers. For a moment, I forgot how to smile properly. She looked up at me and said, "I like your garden." I didn't have a garden, but I took the flowers and thanked her anyway. It was the first time in a long time someone had looked at me without reservation. I realized then that love wasn't something you begged for, it was something you accepted when it came, quiet, unexpected, healing. Some days, I still thought about Matthew, Eliza, Lily. I wondered if they missed me, if they realized what they had lost. But those thoughts didn't hurt like they used to. They were gentle ripples on a vast ocean of calm I was learning to navigate. I wrote letters to no one, pages full of truths I hadn't dared speak aloud. I kept the one from Lily, the crayon drawing folded carefully in my journal. It was a reminder that even in absence, love can linger in small, imperfect ways. At night, I sat on my porch and watched the stars. The same sky I had stared at through so many lonely nights now felt like a vast, open invitation. I was no longer waiting for anyone to call me mother, grandmother, or friend. I was simply Margaret. Hold. Enough. For the first time in decades, I believed it. The knock came late afternoon, soft but deliberate, like a careful question. I was sitting on the porch, a book open but forgotten on my lap. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows over the quiet street. I didn't want to answer, not at first, but the knocking came again, a little firmer this time. So I stood and walked to the door. There they were, Matthew and Eliza. The weight of the years was in their faces, more tired than I remembered, more uncertain, like they had rehearsed this moment and couldn't find the right words. Matthew looked at me first, eyes flickering with something I couldn't place, regret, maybe, or shame. I stepped aside and let them in. The house was small but orderly, filled with the faint scent of lavender and fresh linen. I hadn't invited them, hadn't asked them to come, but I didn't turn them away either. We sat around the kitchen table, the one I'd said so many times, the one they'd left empty on birthdays and holidays. Matthew cleared his throat. "We're sorry," he said quietly, "for everything, for not calling, for not including you, for using your money and not telling you." I nodded. I heard the apology, but it wasn't the sound I was listening for. Eliza's voice broken, softer, strained. "We thought you'd never forgive us. We thought you'd hate us." I took a breath. Forgiveness isn't always about forgetting. It's about understanding. I said, "I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to tell you I'm done being the woman who bends and breaks so others can stand taller." They looked down, ashamed. I could see the years of silence stretched between us like a chasm. Eliza reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. "I wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was the pearl necklace Richard gave me on our 10th anniversary. The one I'd worn on every important day, every family gathering. I touched it lightly, feeling the cool weight of the pearl slipping through my fingers. "Thank you," I said. "But I don't need this anymore." They looked surprised. It wasn't about the necklace. It never had been. I stood and walked to the window, outside. The sky was fading from gold to deep indigo. I said, "I don't hate you, but I can't go back, not yet. Maybe never." Matthew's voice was barely a whisper. "Why not?" "Because you never let me be whole before, because you saw me only as a shadow behind your lives, not as someone with her own light." I turned back to them, steady and calm. "I want you to know that I forgive you," quietly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting the years I spent sitting alone at your table. It means I'm choosing to walk away without carrying bitterness. They nodded. Tears in their eyes. We miss you, Matthew said. And maybe one day, when you're ready, we can find each other again. I smiled softly. Maybe. But for now, I have to find myself. They left soon after, stepping out into the cool evening air like ghosts. Returning to a world I no longer inhabited, I closed the door and leaned against it. Heart steady but aching. This was the end of a chapter, not the final one, but a turning point. Because sometimes, love means knowing when to say goodbye, and sometimes, it means loving yourself enough to walk away. I didn't cry when they left. I thought maybe I would. Thought there'd be some kind of collapse after the door clicked shut. After their voices faded into the hum of the street and I was alone again. But I didn't cry. I just stood there, hand resting on the doorknob, breathing. There's something different about grief that's been lived in for too long. It softens, loses its sharp edges. You stop fighting it, stop explaining it. It becomes like old furniture. Heavy, familiar, part of the room. I made tea, jasmine. The kind I used to drink before the house got busy with crying babies and late bills. And someone always needing something. I sat on the porch with the cup, warm between my palms, and listened to the wind move through the trees. They had come. They had said sorry. They had asked, quietly, to be let back in. And I had answered. Not with cruelty, not with anger, but with truth. It would have been easy to fold again, to step into the role of the mother who forgives everything, no matter how deep the cut. But I had done that before. And every time I did, I lost a little more of myself. This time, I chose differently. I chose peace. A few days later, I opened a blank page in my notebook and wrote down everything I wanted to remember, not about them, but about me. I wrote about the way the light falls on the porch just before sunset, the way Carmen smiles with her eyes when she pours my coffee, the sound of the ocean, steady and faithful, even when no one's listening. I wrote about my name, Margaret, how I used to feel like it was only ever said when someone needed something. Now, it was mine. Again, a whole name, a quiet strength. I walked to the beach with a small tin box in my coat pocket. Inside were the last things I hadn't let go of. A few photos. A cane Lily had once given me with glitter hearts glued on crooked. And the paper where I had first written the words, "They don't get to decide who I am." I sat on a flat rock and watched the tide roll in. The water touched the edges of my shoes and then pulled back like it was asking permission. I opened the box. Held each item for a moment. Then I set them, one by one, into the water. The paper curled and drifted. The cane caught the sunlight once, then sank. The photos, they folded gently, then disappeared. It wasn't about erasing the past. I couldn't and I wouldn't. But I could choose what I carried forward, and what I let the sea take from me. There was a little girl playing with her father further down the beach. She laughed, a high, joyful sound that reminded me of Lily's giggle when she used to spin in my living room wearing a too big tutu. That memory came, and it didn't hurt. It just existed. Like wind, like time. I stood and brushed the sand off my coat. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of water and wrote one final line in my notebook. This time, I decide who gets to call me anything else. Then I closed the book. Set it on the shelf beside the tea canisters, and I turned on the radio, not because I needed to fill the silence, but because I had room for music again, room for joy. Room for me.